Good evening, YouTube. Welcome back to the channel. This is IMAX Sports, another football video, and today I'm going over my Week 14 power rankings of the 2022 NFL season. I do power rankings on the channel every single week, most popular series on the channel. So let me know what you guys think, and let's get right into it. Crazy week this week. First of all, we're starting off, as always, with the dumpster fire. The dumpster fire is gaining more and more teams every single week. This week there's 5. A couple weeks ago there was 1 or 2 every week, so now we're up to 5. Houston at 32, the Broncos at 31. I think it's their second or third time at 31 this season. The Bears at 30, the Rams at 29, and the Saints at 28. Houston's been at 32 pretty much every week except for 1 or 2 of them at the beginning of the season. Not much to be said there. Denver lost to the Ravens after Lamar Jackson went out. Tyler Huntley came in. Baltimore scored a total of 10 points in the game, and the Broncos still couldn't win. Their defense is arguably the best in the league, but they cannot score a point for their entire life, and they can't score their touchdown for the lives of their families. So, they would be 31 if the Texans weren't in existence. The Bears are at 30. They lost to the Packers this week. They were up a lot going into the fourth quarter, and then by the end of the game, they were down by a lot. Aaron Rodgers isn't usually the guy to win a clutch fourth quarter, but he was this week. He does, in fact, own the Bears. The Packers officially have more wins all-time than the Bears, first time in history. And, bad loss for the Bears this week. I've had faith in them since they beat the Patriots, and then they disappointed me every single week. The Rams, I think that says more about the Patriots than the Bears. Rams are at 29. With their loss this week to Seattle, they have actually moved up 2 spots with their loss. They had a pretty tough game. John Wolford's looked okay. He's looked better than Matthew Stafford, honestly, and Cooper Kupp hasn't been playing with him. So there's that. And the Saints are at 28. They haven't played yet. They play tomorrow night against Tampa. If they win, they'll probably move up a couple spots, but they haven't looked great. Moving on to bad, we have the Panthers at 27, we have the Jaguars at 26, we have the Falcons at 25, and we have the Colts at 24. The Panthers are on a bye week. I think that they stayed pretty similar to where they were last week. They might have moved down a spot or 2, but I don't think it was anything major. The Jaguars are at 26 with their loss to the Lions. Devastating loss. They lost by 3 or 4 scores. I think it was 4 scores. They lost 40-14. Tough game for them after the win over the Ravens last week. Surprising victory over the Ravens last week. The Jaguars were looking okay at some points of the season, but generally speaking, they've always reverted back to being the Jaguars, and it's just disappointment after disappointment. Falcons are at 25, and the Colts are at 24. Falcons this week lost to the Steelers. The Steelers had a strong lead, and then the Falcons came back, but they weren't able to get the victory. And then the Colts are at 24 with their loss to Dallas this week. It was an expected loss. They played okay. They've played okay the last few weeks in a row. They almost beat Philadelphia, but they are on a 3-game losing streak. And I really expected more when Matt Ryan came back. He did win them a couple games, and he is close to 500, but they're not looking great. Next category is can beat anyone. We have the Cardinals at 23, we have the Packers at 22, we have the Steelers at 21, and we have the Browns at 20. Cardinals were on bye week this week. Again, I'm not really sure how. I don't think they moved up or down a whole lot. I think they moved down slightly because the Packers and Steelers moved above them. So the Packers moved up, Steelers moved up. Packers moved up because of their win over the Bears. I had them, I think, 26-ish last week. They moved up to 22 with their win. I didn't really want to put them a whole lot higher with their win because it was against the Bears, but they are 5-7 now, I believe, and they're looking like a more legitimate team the last few weeks. Aaron Rodgers has looked a little bit more like himself in some of these games, and although I still think that it's pretty much impossible for them to make the playoffs, they're starting to figure some things out about their team. Christian Watson's looking a lot better. There's a lot more chemistry on offense, and the defense has looked pretty solid. The Steelers are at 21, and the Browns are at 20. I had the Browns at 19 last week before Deshaun Watson came back. That was ambitious because I moved them up solely because Deshaun Watson was coming back, but I didn't want to put them any higher than 19 because I didn't know how he would look. They moved down because other teams moved up higher than the Browns did. By other teams, I mean simply the Raiders. And because of that, and because Deshaun Watson looked horrendously bad, that's why they didn't move up. They did win, but they beat Houston, which is not an accomplishment to be proud of. And they didn't score any points on offense. They scored a field goal. The defense scored 2 touchdowns, and the special teams scored 1. Deshaun Watson was supposed to be the solution for Cleveland for next season, or even for this season if they were in playoff contention. And against the Houston Texans defense, he had 0 touchdowns, an interception, and horrible passing stats. Again, it was his first game back, but Houston was supposed to be the layup for him to go off and get back into rhythm with this offense. Obviously, it's his first week back. They're going to have more prepared for him next week, but it was a poor performance for week 1. I need to see what he does week 2 to have the Browns any higher. I almost put the Steelers above them because of this, but their Browns record is solid. The Steelers are, 4-8, I believe. They have won 3 games of their last 4 since TJ Watt has come back. They are 4-1 with TJ Watt in the lineup. They beat the Bengals, they lost to the Bengals, and they've won 3 other games. And when TJ Watt is in the lineup, the Steelers are a different beast. They beat the Falcons this week. It was a close game. They had control for the majority of it. And yeah, the Steelers have been moving up and up and up in the rankings every week. I expect them to continue moving up if they continue to play with this well with TJ Watt. And I think Mike Tomlin is fighting to keep his record of 18 seasons in a row over 500 or 500 or better. Next up, we have I don't even know at this point. We have the Raiders at 19, we have the Chargers at 18, we have the Lions at 17, Patriots at 16, and the Buccaneers at 15. Last week, I had the Patriots at an ambitious position. I had them, I believe, at 11 or 12. Part of that was because I think that we played better than the Vikings in the Vikings game. I thought that we should have beaten them with better coaching and better refereeing. But alas, and then this week, we looked horrible on defense, and Mac Jones looked good again for the 3rd week in a row. But we've lost for the 2nd week in a row, and Bill Belichick and the offense hasn't been able to score for the 3rd week in a row. They scored a little bit in the Vikings game, but in the Jets game, Mac Jones looked good, and we couldn't score. The Vikings game, he looked good, and they didn't win. And then the Bills game, he looked good, and they didn't score or win. So Mac is doing better and better every week, but Belichick can't figure out how to incorporate him in the offense. Belichick and Matt Patricia at this point in the season need to say we're 6-6. We're not making the playoffs at this point. We need to see what Mac Jones can do, and they need to sling it down the ball every single game because relying on the defense is no longer working. If we want to win games, we need to let Mac Jones sling the ball as far as he possibly can and turn into Joe Burrow. I think that Mac Jones has the potential to not obviously be Joe Burrow, but to play well by throwing the ball downfield to players like Devontae Adams, to players like Nelson Aguilar. Sure, we might turn the ball over, but we were competitive in the Ravens game. We were competitive in the Ravens game, even though we turned it over 4 times. We were not competitive in the Buffalo game. And we can't have offense if we're not competitive throwing the football. And they don't want to throw the football. So yeah, that's my rant about the Patriots. The Raiders are at 19 and the Chargers are at 18. The Chargers just lost to the Raiders this week. The Chargers have looked very disappointing the entirety of... These are the 2 most disappointing in the teams this year, in the league this year. The Raiders aren't doing as bad as they were earlier in the season, as they've strung a few wins together. The Chargers have been 500 pretty much the whole year, and they were expected to be one of the best teams in the league. They've had some injuries, a significant number of injuries, but there's been so many games that they should have won, and they haven't been able to beat a legitimate team yet. Their best games of the season were their 2 games where they lost to Kansas City. If your losses are your best games of the season, then there's an issue with your team. The Raiders are simply not above them at this point because the Raiders are having late success, and because of that, it's harder for them to move up the power rankings. But if they continue to have the success, then they'll be above the Chargers for next week. The Lions are at 17. I almost put the Lions above the Patriots, but I couldn't do that with a win over the Jaguars. I just couldn't. The Patriots demolished the Lions in their matchup. Amon-Ra St. Brown was injured during the game, so that was part of it. But the reason why I don't have the Lions above the Patriots is because they just haven't beaten a lot of legitimate teams. They looked good against Buffalo last week, which is something the Patriots can't say. So I'll give them that. Between the Lions, the Patriots, and Tampa, I really have no idea who to put where. Tampa, I gave the benefit of the doubt. I do expect them to win tomorrow, but if they do lose tomorrow, then they'll probably be at 17, maybe 18 or 19. But I gave Tampa the benefit of the doubt because they have Tom Brady, and I gave the Patriots the benefit of the doubt over the Lions because the defense is more consistent. But Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's my guy. I hope he makes the Pro Bowl. I hope that people aren't clouded by the week or 4 that he was slightly injured. That did hurt his season stats, and I hope that Amon-Ra St. Brown earns the playoff spot, Pro Bowl spot like he deserves. Next category we have should be lower. We have the Titans at 14, we have the Ravens at 13, and we have Seattle at 12. All of these teams should be lower. The Titans look horrendously bad. This is their second blowout to one of the competitive teams in the league. They still haven't won a competitive game against a strong team, and they're only at 14 because of their record. The Ravens are at 13. I've given Tennessee the benefit of the doubt a lot of weeks. This week, I'm not doing it. The Ravens are at 13. Lamar Jackson's injured, and they've looked horrendously bad with him the last 3 weeks. They've played Carolina, the Jaguars, and the Broncos. And they were all nail-biters, like nail-biter games against the Texans, against the Jaguars, the Broncos, and the Panthers. And now Lamar's out, so what's up? And then Seattle's at 12. They've looked horrible the last 2 weeks too, and then played a very competitive game where they're losing for a lot towards the end against the Rams. All of these teams should be lower. None of these are top 10 teams, although they have records to make the playoffs or win their divisions. And yeah, that's about it. They just can't be any lower than this because the teams below them are bad. Next we have the AFC. Oh, not the AFC playoff favorites. We just have playoff favorites. Last week this was the AFC playoff favorites. Now it's just playoff favorites. We have the Jets at 9. We have the Giants at 10, and we have Washington at 11. The Jets and Giants have kind of been together for most of the season. The Giants moved down a little bit last week, but now they're back up because everyone else has moved below them. The Jets moved down slightly with their loss to Minnesota, but not really much because it was a competitive loss. And Washington has been kind of stuck at 16 ever since they beat the Eagles. They beat the Eagles. I put them at 16, and then they beat a bunch of teams that they're supposed to beat, and they stayed at 16. Now this week, basically, I was hesitant to put them higher because they were winning games that they were supposed to win, and I thought that the teams above them were more consistent. The last 3 weeks have proven me utterly wrong. The teams above them were not more consistent. The Giants had been slowly moving down until this week because I thought the teams above them were more consistent. Clearly they are not. Both of these teams played a solid game against each other this week, and they ended up in a tie. So now they're both at 10. The Giants have one less loss, but Washington has had a stronger streak recently. And the Jets are at 9. Obviously, they were at, I believe, 7 or 8 last week. Couple teams moved up above them who were in the tier with them, and so now they're at 9. They had a tight competitive game against the Vikings, similar to the Patriots game. Yeah, there's not much to be said. Mike White looked okay. He didn't have any touchdowns, but he had 300 yards again. I think that he still moves the ball a lot better than Zach Wilson does. And I think that the Jets' offense looks more promising with Mike White, and their defense still played an okay game, all things considered, with the Vikings' offense. Ooh. Next up, we have the Super Bowl contenders. We have the Dolphins at 8, we have the Vikings at 7, and we have Buffalo at 6. I've had Miami at 3 for the last few weeks, as a lot of the teams above them were moved down. The reason why that they are now down to 8 is because they lost to the 49ers this week in the first competitive game that they've had since Tua came back. Since Tua was injured, or since he came back, they've only played teams that they're supposed to beat. Similar to Washington, I was hesitant to move them down, but because they hadn't lost. For Washington, it's because they hadn't lost. For the Dolphins, it's because they also hadn't lost to the bad teams. Now they played a competitive game against a competitive team, and they lost. And their offense didn't look great against the top defense. Miami has demolished some bad defenses, but they played a top defense this week, and it didn't look the same as it has been. It looked like that against the Patriots. It didn't. The Patriots. Sorry, at the beginning of the season, the Patriots and the Bills games, their offense didn't look the same as it did in that streak recently. And the Ravens game, it did look like that, but the Ravens haven't had the most consistent defense in the league either. So whenever they play top 5 defenses like the Patriots, Bills, or the 49ers, they haven't been able to put up the same type of numbers on offense. And so although I am optimistic about Tua, and I think that he's going to have a good season with them, and I think that they're going to go far in the playoffs, their offense hasn't convinced me yet, simply because they haven't been able to put up points against tough defenses. Vikings beat the Jets this week. I think they moved down, so did Buffalo, but only because other teams moved around them. two teams moved above them, and then the Dolphins moved below them, so they each moved down one spot. And then Buffalo obviously beat the Patriots in a pretty much blowout win. It was kind of expected if you're a Patriots fan or anyone else in the NFL. They could have been higher, but they really didn't look great the couple weeks leading up to the Patriots game. And then this is kind of an expected win for them, although it was in Foxborough. And I think that they played a pretty good game. I think that they are a top 5 team, but the teams above them I think are slightly more consistent recently. A lot of my power rankings are based off of more recent games, and the other teams above them have been more consistent more recently. Finally, we have the NFL's elites. We have the San Francisco 49ers at 5, the Kansas City Chiefs at 4, the Bengals at 3, we have the Cowboys at 2, and we have the Eagles at 1. The Eagles are back at number 1 with their win over Tennessee, their dominant win over Tennessee this week. The Eagles have not been number 1 for the last few weeks in a row because of their loss to Washington and their inconsistent play for a few weeks. Last week and this week, they've gone back to their old habits of not turning the ball over, playing consistent offense, consistent defense, and just controlling the game. They did that against arguably a top 10 team, Tennessee, up until this week, and yeah, it was a strong win. Kansas City was dethroned because of their loss, and so the Eagles reclaimed the spot. Dallas beat the Colts. Not much to be said. They were at number 2 last week, so now they're staying at number 2. Bengals are at number 3 with their win over Kansas City. Kansas City's moved down from 1 to 4 with their loss to the Bengals. Kansas City's still obviously one of the most dominant and consistent teams the last few years. This year, a lot of people doubted them because they no longer had Tyreek Hill, but they're proving that they are still a top contender in the league. And the loss to the Bengals wasn't expected, but we're starting to find out that Joe Burrow owns Patrick Mahomes. And no matter when they're playing, where they're playing, what they're playing for, the Bengals are going to win that matchup. And then the 49ers are at 5. I've been hesitant to move them up the last few weeks. A lot of other people have. This week with the win over Miami, as I've been high on Miami, proved that they were able to contend with the big dogs. This was very similar to Washington. Washington and San Francisco, I improved them slightly when they got the beginning of their win streak, and then as their win streak continued, it was like, okay, I expect them to win this game. Okay, the Chargers, all their wide receivers were injured. Okay, they haven't beaten a single impressive team the entire season. And now this week they beat Miami, solidifying the fact that they are a top 5 team and a Super Bowl contender for the Super Bowl this season. So, and then they can't be above Kansas City because they got demolished by them. But I do think that they are a top 5 team currently. So, thank you guys for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to like the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you are new to the channel, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace. Huge shout out to Quinn Lacey for supporting the channel with a channel membership.